Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on present-day issues as well as opportunities for the area. We'll also focus on history and stories from the past and the present. I'm Christopher Bianchi, and I'm happy to have as our first guest on the podcast, Mayor Kevin Stuessi of Greenport. We'll be talking about current issues and exciting opportunities for the future of Greenport, as well as why he decided to run for mayor and how he made his way over to Greenport. I hope you enjoy this episode. I'd like to welcome Mayor Kevin Stuessi to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. Thank you for coming on today.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. This is exciting that the library is endeavoring on this wonderful project to talk about the history of Greenport and people who are here.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'd just like to start off with a basic introduction with the people we bring in today, just a little bit where you were born and raised and what your job currently is now, separate from...
Sure. I'm relatively new to Greenport. I've been here 6 years. I was born and raised in Northern California. I grew up from birth all the way through high school in what's known as Almaden Valley, which is now a good part of Silicon Valley. And when I was a child, it was walnut orchards and dairy farms and apricot orchards. I played in the hills of Almaden Valley, which was ironically, one of the very first wineries in the country. I think it might have been the first, and was famous for jug wine for years. And now being here on the North Fork in the winery, with all the wineries around us is fun. But it was a special place, and it changed pretty dramatically over my childhood. I spent my summers in Santa Cruz with my aunt and uncle and cousins and grandparents who lived there on the beach. A lot of time up in Yosemite in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where my mother was born and raised, just outside of the Yosemite, along with her father too. They had a small resort and restaurant back in the day, and then spent a good amount of time traveling in a lot of other places, living in a number of cities on the West Coast, and then ultimately ended up raising my daughters in a small town in Idaho, before heading east to New York, and managed to get stuck and was looking for a place to base myself, and needed to be by the water and out in nature, and found Greenport, and I'm very happy here. It's a really wonderful place.
So you said your parents, you were raised in California, and your parents grew up there as well? And
my mother did. She grew up literally in Yosemite Park at the edge of it, where her grandfather, my great grandfather, had a little resort and restaurant. My father was actually born and raised in Iowa, and then lived in Colorado for a while. And when he was in the military, he and my mom lived on the East Coast, actually, just outside of Washington D.C. in Virginia.
Nice. And where did they originally immigrate from?
Oh, my family's been in the United States for hundreds of years. I am not father's side of the family, Switzerland. Actually, members of them came across west with the Donner Party, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And then my mother's side of the family is of mixed European descent, Scandinavian, English, Scottish, etc. But it's been in the United States for many hundreds of years.
Nice.
Yeah. But one of the wonderful things about growing up where I did was there was a huge immigrant population, and I lived on a street of 16 houses, and it was literally like the United Nations. And I got a love for food and culture through that, with neighbors that were first generation Italian, Japanese, Korean, Persian, English, Austrian. It was wild. And then as the community developed over time, as the computer industry took root, there was a large amount of influx of people from Southeast Asia, India, China, and Japan who moved there. And so I really grew up in a very diverse place that changed dramatically over time. And the perils and challenges of development hit us square in the face, and very quickly the farm that was across the street was torn down and houses were built and the dairy was, demolished. And, it just, I mean, I saw that through my whole childhood. It was one of the things that, coming to Greenport, after falling in love with it, progress is inevitable, but you need some barriers in place to make sure that you're doing things right for the community and what people want. And so that's what drove me to run for office. And I'm now been in office for 6-7 months now, and working hard to try and do the right thing for the people of the village.
Nice, definitely. And did you say you moved here
6 years ago to Greenport, and was splitting my time initially between the city and Greenport, where I was based for a lot of the work that I was doing.
Okay. What exactly kind of made you, was it that link that you saw in where you grew up in California that was similar to out here that made you really like the area? Or
without a doubt, I think one of the things that really attracted me to it was the open space, and being able to see the sky, the stars at night. I've growing up by the water, it was always really important to me. My grandfather and great grandfather were big fishermen, and I enjoy fishing and being on the water. I'm a kayaker as well, and so having that sense of freedom and space around me and being close to nature is something that I thrive off of. And I can do the cities in limited amounts.
Nice. And since you're 6 years here, have you noticed any change in Greenport? That you feel that it's changed at all within those 6 years? Because you were here before the pandemic.
Yes.
And after, but has there been anything that sticks out to you, or you feel like it's somewhat similar?
No, I think in a lot of ways it's similar, and we have a wonderful foundation of a really great community who cares a lot about where they live and protecting it and supporting each other. But at the same time, there have been contributing factors that have changed pretty dramatically and accelerated, in large part due to COVID and how the world has changed, and a lot of money and developers taking a look at the village. And, that's frightened me. And, seeing investors, buy up houses just to rent them on weekends as a profit center, as opposed to a family buying them to live there, or, the pressures of development looking to, expand and build beyond what the village may be able to support, is something that I'm concerned about, and we need to manage, because we should be the ones in the driver's seat making decisions for what's best for our community, not, larger developers who are, looking to make a profit. And that, not all of them are bad. There's some, I'm sure, who have good intentions and want to do something that they believe fits with the community, but the community needs to have input in that. And, that was a large part of why we pushed for the moratorium to change and update the zoning code in the village, because the zoning code hadn't been updated in decades. And, things like gas stations and car dealerships, car dealerships haven't been here for decades, so we don't need them in the code. And, how many more hotels do we need? So we've put some limits on that, and, really listen to the community, and are working hard to look towards the future and see what, is going to be good for Greenport 10, 20, and 30 years down the road.
Wonderful. And was it specifically the change in what was in terms of development and developers coming in, and how you saw how Greenport was changing after the pandemic, that made you want to really run for village mayor?
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't considered even running for office. I was happy participating in the process as a resident and going to meetings and expressing my opinions based upon, learnings I've had in life, and ultimately decided to throw my hat in the ring for the election because of some concerns that I wasn't certain we were going in the right direction, and, figured I would at least be somebody who would talk about those issues, and made a point of doing so during it, and was a bit surprised that I won. But gratified that the village community selected me, and working hard to now deliver on what we said we were going to do. So yeah.
And you said you didn't expect to win, but you did try to reach out to the community during your running process, but you didn't expect that kind of first time running.
No, I mean, it's hard to be anonymous when you're 6'3" with long blonde hair and ride a bicycle all over the place. I have a core group of friends, but I didn't know a lot of people in the community. I would know faces from, shopping at the grocery store, or picking up a coffee, or having my egg sandwich at Sterlington Deli. But during the course of the campaign and then the push for the moratorium, I knocked on literally hundreds of doors, and what I thought would be quick conversations ended up, I think the shortest one was 5 minutes, and the average one was about 20 minutes, and one lasted an hour and 15 minutes. It was just so wonderful to be embraced by the community, and people inviting me into their homes and telling me about things that concern them. And a lot of it, too, was hearing stories of things that I may not have known about, or history of different events in Greenport and people. And it's one of the things that I'm so excited about with the podcast the library is launching, because there are so many stories that need to be recorded and saved before some of those people aren't here with us to be able to share those.
Yes. And just to switch slightly, what do you think would be your three major or critical issues that you feel are facing the Greenport area, that you feel is close to you, that are major?
Sure. Well, I think, one of the largest, which was a big push during the election and then over the last 6 months with the zoning code, is preserving the historic character and sense of community and scale of our village. And so I believe we have done that by putting in the right guardrails with updated zoning code, but it's still going to take work on behalf of the board and the community to be active, stand up, speak their minds. Another huge issue we're facing is the environment and climate change. And, whether it's things like groundwater pollution or rising sea levels and drainage, buildings that are getting occurrences of, flooding, et cetera. Those are things we really need to take a look at. And I've spoken out and I'm pushing to develop a climate resiliency plan. And I was really, pleased to see that the current Southold Town Board is in agreement that they want to do that as well. And we can work together to get that done. And then, the third thing that is really important in preserving our sense of community is making sure that we have the ability for people that have grown up here and maybe gone away to school to be able to come back and have a place to live. And then those that are working here, that they have a place to live as well. And that's gotten much, much more difficult with the extreme rise in housing prices over the past 5 years. And so if you were to graph housing prices over the past, call it, 20 years, it was a gradual increase, and then COVID hit and it rise dramatically. And so the ability for somebody to rent themselves an apartment or buy a house is much, much more difficult than it used to be. And I think there's a lot that we can do within our 1 mile of village property, let alone on the border of the village with Southold, to try and create some additional housing for people and, work with the state and others on some incentive programs for people that want to stay in the community or, need to find a place to live, to work out here. Because one of the biggest problems we're facing is huge amount of traffic on the roads of, those that work here coming in.
I think that's wonderful with the climate plan, and that would be through the town of Southold. It wouldn't be developed through the village of Greenport.
It would be developed jointly with the town of Southold. We obviously sit in the middle of it, but have the largest amount of coastline that is commercial. They, of course, have more coastline that's residential, but between the two of us, it's a problem that we need to address and plan for, because we're already facing the challenges of it. And we would be working with both the state and the federal government to put a plan in place, and then to work off that plan. And what it would also help with is get us the needed funding we're going to need for dealing with issues like, raising roads in certain places or developing better drainage at the end of streets. And so, perfect example would be the 5th and 6th Street Park. The second the tides are high, let alone a storm, the water from the bay comes up onto the streets and floods it, and then it takes all of those pollutants that are on the streets and puts them back in the bay. And we all see what's happened with pollutants in the bay with the scallop harvest, which has just been completely decimated over a number of years now from what it used to be. It's great to see what's happening with all the oyster farmers that are out there, and there's a few people now trying to grow seaweed, which has just been they're just now able to do with the state of New York, and those are things that will help clean the water, which would be great. But there's other things that we need to do in some of the other communities, in particular with sewage runoff. Greenport's very fortunate that we have a sewer system, but there are a lot of homes, not just on the North Fork, but on the South Fork too, that are on antiquated septic systems that are draining into the bay and
Yes.
polluting.
And the village doesn't include the North Road at all? Is that the county road?
Yes, no, it doesn't. Our 1 square mile stops just up at Bridge Street
Okay.
on the north end, and then it's a bit wonky and goes over down towards the school, and then down 6th Street
Okay.
to it. There's a number of people, quite a number, whose address says Greenport, but aren't voting eligible residents of Greenport, even though they might be on our sewage system and be getting electricity from us. They are members of the town of Southold, which is sort of an interesting thing, because as Greenport residents, we can vote for Southold town positions and pay a lot of taxes to the town of Southold. But there's a certain amount of people that are in what's called Greenport West, or on the outskirts of it, that aren't technical village residents.
Okay. And you also talked about affordable housing for the village. How does that work in terms of bringing in? Have you worked as a developer yourself?
I was never a developer myself, in the sense that I didn't have a company, but I worked for other developers, and so I spent a period of time in the city working for a company that was and still is one of the largest owners and developers of affordable housing in the country. In addition to doing some other residential work and commercial, etc., hotels and restaurants, and it's a challenge, and especially as property prices grow up, it gets more and more challenging with those rises. But there's a lot of incentives through the state and the federal government, and there are people that do this for a living, and we need to work with the town and then also the state to try and find solutions in pockets of property that is available, and look at areas like the second floor of a lot of our commercial spaces downtown. And so we do have some residents in those second floor spaces, and some even on third floors. One of the things we did with the code changes is we changed the entire south side of Front Street from waterfront commercial to retail commercial, and as of right now, residences are allowed above places where they weren't allowed before. We're also looking at an overlay district right now where we would incentivize adding full-time year-round housing within the height limits of some other buildings that don't currently have that. And so those are things that might encourage somebody to fix up a building that has been in disrepair or hasn't been used in a long time, like the arcade.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be wonderful to see that be rejuvenated as retail on the ground floor, and then full-time year-round residents who live and work in the village living upstairs. And so I believe what we're doing with community support is going to encourage that, and it will also add back more full-time residents in the downtown district, so that we'll have more life in the February and March months. one of the things with that that's so exciting is seeing the Greenport movie theater get turned into the North Forks Arts Center, and that's
Yes.
I've been so pleased to take time and work with them on seeing that happen, and the community really came out for Tony's effort with that. It's really been wonderful to see, and that's going to be something that's going to add a different spirit of life to the village
Definitely.
year round.
Yep. With the housing, would that be called like mixed use development in terms of, like you said, retail or businesses on the first floor mixed with?
Yeah, that would
residential?
traditionally be called mixed use if there's more than one use in the building. So if it's
Okay.
a retail and a restaurant and some residential, that would be mixed use. And so we have some examples of that in some of the buildings. The old Mills building at the corner of Front and Main across from Crazy Beans, the red building,
Yes.
which has a number of retail stores on the bottom and then residences above it. That is certainly a mixed-use building that changed over time. It used to be, sale making, and now people are living in those spaces.
Yes. Because I think that's definitely, I think, a good way to go in terms of some other affordable housings where they're more isolated and they have to use a car and they can't walk to anything, like some previous developments. So I think going that way is nice with making a more vibrant downtown and walkable.
Oh, without a doubt. Whatever we can do to create more housing, which is within the district and very walkable, and get people out of the cars is going to benefit everybody. One of the other things we're taking a look at in the downtown area is applying for some grants for some revitalization so that we can improve the sidewalks, the walkability, ease of riding a bicycle around, and looking at how to better manage parking, because the more we can do to encourage people to get out of their cars and walk and bicycle, the more enjoyable the village is going to be. It's gotten to the point where we literally have people making U-turns in the middle of Front Street right now. And we just bought a bunch of signs that say this is pedestrian crossing, no U-turns, and are working to increase the budget to add enforcement, which is needed for it. And so Greenport has gotten very, very popular, and there's only so much of the tourism that we can handle, and we need a balance between businesses and tourism and residential needs. And that's hard to balance at times.
And with the parking issue, is there any talk about having some type of shuttle from somewhat outside of the village, or maybe over by the skate park, that brings people in that they can park over there? Or
it's funny you mention. I'm actually going into a meeting after this with the Business Improvement District and a number of business owners, and we're talking about off-site parking that employees of a lot of the stores and restaurants could be able to use, and potentially
Wonderful.
some visitors as well, with a shuttle that would run in a circle and bring people in, and would get I think on an average summer July day, we could probably easily keep 100 to 150 cars out of the village. And each car coming in is coming in and then leaving, so that's 2 trips, so that's 300 cars a day, which would be really meaningful to increasing the walkability and livability of the downtown area. We don't have a parking problem in February or late November. We do Memorial Day through Labor Day, which and frankly some weekends all the way through Columbus Day now, with everything that happens in the fall.
Definitely. What do you think of because before, I think there was only the major highway, what was called the highway on the North Road, the county road, but the Long Island Railroad has been coming and going since, I think, mid to late 1800s. Some people I've talked to have said that it's not so convenient and you have to switch in Ronkonkoma, but is there anything, I know this is a much bigger thing, not just for the Greenport, because it goes through Southold, Mattituck, Riverhead. But I feel like that could be something, because I know people definitely use it, and you can get dropped off and then take one back later in the day for especially tourists or people I know take the early train that work in New York City, but they live out here.
Yeah, when I was having to go into the city more often in years past, I would always make a point of taking the train first thing in the morning rather than the prior night, because I'd do anything to get one more night. One of the things that I'm hoping we'll be able to do over time is increase the frequency of the trains, because that would make it easier for people to come and go and get them out of their cars, whether it's people that are who are here and going in the city for work part-time, or people that are coming out to visit. I've had conversations with a number of the hotel owners out here to see what they might be able to do to better encourage their visitors to take the train or even the jitney when coming, rather than bringing a car here as well. As we all know, the Long Island Expressway can just be an absolute nightmare, and so whatever can be done for public transit would be helpful. But that's going to take some time for sure.
Yes, definitely.
It's the South Fork has gotten a lot of focus on it more recently because their traffic problems are about 10x of what ours are.
Yes.
But if we want to look at what our future is, all we have to do is take the ferry across the South Fork and see what's happening there, and know that's the direction we're heading in, which is why we need to be working on these things now.
Definitely. I was curious, so Greenport's definitely been, I feel like it's been much more of a working waterfront community, and maritime fishing and oysters and other related industries. And people have said that the tourists have always been here. I mean, it's always been a tourist destination, even back into the 1800s, people coming out from New York City. And I think people have even said there were more hotels back in the early 1900s than there are now. But how do you feel about making sure Greenport is still a working waterfront for maritime industry? And how can we still keep some of that? Because even over by the East End Seaport Museum, there's the dock that used to have the trains out there, but now they have the fishing boats there, and just making sure we keep some of that. I mean, where Mitchell's Park used to have more stuff there, but then you had the Mitchell restaurant, which burned down. And so how do we keep some more of the maritime industries?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is really important. And Greenport has a long and celebrated history of, a commercial working waterfront. It is down significantly from what it once was, but it is still alive and happening. And all you need to do is go over to Steve Clark's shipyard, and you'll see what's happening over there with a whole number of vendors that are over there. Or, going over to North Fork Welding, just, a mile from here, which is servicing boats and marine uses from all over the place. The old railroad dock, which does have, working fishing boats on it as well. What can we do to bring more of them? Try and attract them. I think there is the ability of attracting more marine uses, whether it's marine science, additional aquaculture. The updated zoning code does exactly that. In the working waterfront district, where, in the prior code, things like hotels could have happened, which now cannot in some of these limited areas. We only have a small number of parcels left, and so we're not going to cede those to some big hotel to come in, but we're going to do what we can to encourage the existing businesses to not only thrive and prosper, but bring in others that will enhance what they're doing. There are things in the prior code that weren't allowed, like marine science education or a boat building school. Those are now allowed in the new code. Aquaculture wasn't allowed in the waterfront commercial district, and now it is. And so I know Steve Clark, who has the shipyard, would love to work with an aquaculture company over there. And so I think there's a lot we can do, and there's also a lot of incentives through the state and the federal government to build some of these uses. As part of it, the climate resiliency plan will help, because it's going to show that we care about the waterfront.
And I think residents that have been here a long time, they would say, well, especially with that housing development by Sterling Harbor, that used to be an oyster.
Anywhere you see condos was an oyster processing facility at one point.
Yeah.
You can't do that now in what's remaining of the small amount of working waterfront that we have.
Okay.
But yeah, Greenport has changed a lot over time. Your point about having more hotel rooms or boarding house rooms a century ago I don't know the actual numbers, but I think there probably were at one point. But life was a lot different then when everybody wasn't driving a car and all
Yes.
of the other things that we have to deal with. And so that's a big issue, is the amount of cars that are coming into the village, and whatever we can do to try and tamp that down and make it safer for people to walk and ride their bikes. I'd love to see more people, with the kids, taking a bike with a basket in the back to the grocery store rather than driving a car when they can. But, doing what we can to make it easier for residents too, with, looking at potentially some stickers for resident parking in certain areas that gives them preference over the visiting tourist, while at the same time, leveraging those that are visiting for a small amount of money for some paid parking during the peak summer months too, which will help raise funds for the village to take care of things that need to be taken care of, like sidewalks and new bicycle racks, etc.
And I know I see you riding around on the bicycle a lot. I'm sure a lot of residents do. How do you feel about, in terms of safety for people riding their bikes? It's not really a bike lane, or
there is more we need to do. Is it as safe as I would like? Absolutely not. And so a large part of what I'm hoping to do with a downtown revitalization grant that we're going to apply for next year is to increase the walkability and ability for people to not just walk or push strollers, but to bicycle through the downtown, and prioritize humans over automobiles, such that it becomes a more inviting area for that.
Definitely. Do you know, for the furniture store, it's been kind of in that family for a long time, and I think it's been up for sale.
Are you talking about the Greenport Auditorium and,
the Greenport
Golden Furniture?
Yes.
Yeah, so the multi-generation families had that building for decades now. The father was an attorney, and I've walked the space, and his office is still up there with all of his records. And his son now has been running a furniture store there for decades. It was for sale, went off the market, and then is back up for sale again. I know of somebody that is working very hard with a small amount of community members to turn it into a public arts center.
Wow.
Which would be complementary to what's happening with the North Fork Arts Center,
Yes.
which would be wonderful to see. One of the things with the prior code was that building could have become any number of things, including a hotel. The revisions to the code put more limits on it, but unless the owner of the building wants to protect it in perpetuity by registering it as a National Historic Landmark and protecting the interior, there are a lot of things that could happen with it. So I'm very hopeful for what it might become in the future, and I think all we have to do is look at what's become of the Greenport movie theater being protected. Yes. They literally signed the deal last week for it. So
yes.
I'm hopeful, and the community certainly has spoken that's what they'd like to see in Greenport.
And I'm sure the community would be behind another form of a arts center and support it, just like they did with the
I absolutely. And you look at, we have a lot of wonderful things on the North Fork, but we don't have as many opportunities for celebrating the arts as those that live on the South Fork. And a simple comparison would be Sag Harbor, and looking at the number of theaters, whether it's live theater, movie theaters,
Definitely.
arts, etc., just in that town versus what we have on the entirety of the North Fork.
I wanted to just ask, we're kind of getting into December now, and I was wondering if you had any things you wanted to announce on the podcast to listeners and residents, things that you're working on, like right now going into the new year.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things we're doing is we're launching a new communication strategy from the village, and people will be receiving a newsletter in their inbox if they're on our existing list. If not, share it with a friend when you do get it, and look on the village website here shortly for that to sign up. We're going to be holding some more meetings, Vision for Greenport series, where we're going to be looking for feedback and comments from residents on what they feel we should be doing relative to community housing, how they feel about short-term rentals, what they want to see with, more arts in the village, etc. There are going to be some applications coming up on the planning board that people are going to want to be aware of, and we'll be featuring those in the newsletter as well, and really trying to make it easier to communicate with people in the village.
Wonderful. And did you hired a new clerk for
Yes.
the village, and are they working with all the documents that you have in the basement area? Because I've heard stories just about that. It's hard to find things, and just a lot of stuff that needs to be processed or even given over to Sterling Historical Society. And
Yeah, it's, the village has a history, and as part of history, there's a lot of documents, and it's everything from, a ledger of deeds and sales that's, beautifully bound in leather from 150 years ago, to tax receipts from 10 years ago or 30 years ago, let alone, tremendous amount of records on properties, et cetera, et cetera. And so none of this has ever been digitized or organized, and we are working very closely with the state of Albany right now, who's been down twice in recent months, to help us go through these and determine what should be disposed of. And there is a large number of things that we don't need to have anymore. What needs to be saved and digitized, and then what things should be preserved in a manner befitting a historical society, and working with our existing historical society on that. And so it's going to be a lengthy process. It's going to cost a lot of money as well. We are working with the state on getting a grant for in excess of $100,000 to help us digitize these things.
Wow.
But in recent weeks, we have literally had the state down twice. They've brought a big truck down, and we have removed over 150 boxes that went to a shredding center of things that did not need to be preserved and saved. So that's getting us a little bit more room, and we'll get to a point soon where we can start getting better organized and getting things digitized, so then we can better serve the community. And where it might take us a lot longer to find something for somebody, there will be a day where they'll be able to just go on a computer and hit a search button and find it themselves.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
It would, yeah.
And just in closing, is there anything that you would like to say in terms of what you're hoping for the future of Greenport and the community and its history down the line? What you would hope to see?
Well, I'm very hopeful that your podcast will be enormously successful, and you'll be able to capture a lot of the stories and things that people know, that will be not just shared but then preserved for different generations. As part of that, in my role as mayor, I'm very hopeful that in a few years from now, we'll be able to look back and see that our administration did some great things for the village, made improvements where they were needed in the infrastructure, made repairs where needed, got things built that made sense, and engage with the community a lot more. And, we're in a world where communication can be so easy in many ways, but at the same time, we're very overwhelmed by it. And I want to have a good amount that is online and through a newsletter, but then a lot more that we're doing with, person-to-person communication and meetings for, feedback with the community.
Wonderful. I just want to thank you very much for coming on today, and it was wonderful to talk to you, and we would definitely like to have you on again in the future.
No, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure, and again, I'll be looking forward to listening to some of the stories and history that you're going to get from others. Library's a really special place.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that first episode of the Floyd Memorial Library podcast with Mayor Kevin Stuessi. And be on the lookout for our next episode in the coming weeks, hopefully a week or two. And take care. We'll see you soon.